Hey guys, my name's Sam and welcome to Prep Medic. This week's video, I'm going to be giving you some tips and tricks for EMS interviews. So I will be completely honest with you, this video is largely born of frustration. I am very heavily involved with our hiring process with my employer. And we are seeing this time and time again where we have people coming in that are just not prepared for the interview. That's not to say everybody's bad or it's negative all the time, but we have a lot of candidates that I think could be really good candidates that are making really silly mistakes or not preparing adequately for this type of interview. So I really want to go through what we do, what to expect in the industry, some tips and tricks for interviews, and then some of the basics of interviewing and how to prepare a resume and what to dress for in an EMS interview. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the process for EMS agencies varies area to area, but generally speaking, you'll have a panel interview of some kind. You'll have a skills assessment that is probably a hands-on scenario or something of the sort, and then you may have an agility test or a physical fitness test. Any EMS agency that only does a board interview or that only does one kind of interview, I would be kind of cautious going there simply because if they're not testing any kind of clinical skills or they're not requiring a certain amount of experience, you don't really know who you're going to be working with. So really try to go somewhere. If they have a robust interview process, that is a super good sign for the EMS agency itself. So leading up to the interview, you need to prepare. And there are a couple things you really need to get down. The first thing you need to do is you need to go online and you need to look up the most common interview questions, formulate the responses and specific scenarios that relate to those questions in your head, and then practice them on somebody. If you do not practice, you're going to come into the interview and you're going to stutter and stammer and not have examples when we want you to tell examples. The next thing you need to do is you need to go buy a suit or you need to go get your suit dry cleaned. This is an EMS job. This isn't a low-level position. We are trusting you to go into people's houses. We're trusting you with narcotics and other kinds of controlled substances. Basically, there's a lot of trust. And with that, we need to make sure that you are professional. So the first way to make a good impression is to walk in dressed super neatly, and that should be a suit and a tie. A lot of places will say, no, it's okay, business casual or, a little bit formal, but it's okay, no suit and tie. Come in a suit and tie anyways. Nobody has ever not gotten hired because they wore a suit and tie to an interview. I would also, if you're not completely familiar with what their process is, I would also bring a change of clothes, something like gym shorts or workout clothes that still look presentable. So if they do have a physical agility portion of that, you can change into that at some point and not tear up your new suit. The third piece of prep you should do is you need to refine your resume. You need to print it out on nice paper. Now, your resume should not be more than one page. Once you get to the age of 30, you've got a little bit of experience behind you, you can start to justify that 2-page resume, but generally speaking, it's one page and it should be bold text. It does not need to be your entire work history. You filled that online on their application. All it needs to be is the relevant information, the most impressive work that you've done in the past. Now, if they ask for a CV, that is different, and that is everything in chronological order where you've worked. However, most of the time, a resume will be fine. You should print out probably 5 to 10 copies of that resume to bring with you for a panel interview so you can hand everybody in that room a copy of it. A lot of times the people interviewing you will not have a copy of your resume even if you submitted it in the initial application. As far as preparation goes, the last thing you have to do is you have to research the agency you're applying for. Know what their call volume is, their demographics, what special teams they have. As many little trivia facts that you can store in your brain, the better. Because with that, they're going to ask you things and they might even ask you what you know about the company. And if you can spew out a bunch of facts about them, that's going to reflect well on you because they know that you care about it and they know that you've done your research. After that, when you've done your research, formulate 2 to 5 questions you have about the company or the position and make sure you ask them at the end of the interview. When they ask you, hey, do you have any questions? That is not a trying to help you out question. That is an interview question, and we expect you to come in with some curiosities about the company. Myself, where I work, we have very little information online about what specifically we do on a daily basis. So when somebody comes in and they say they don't have any questions, I know that's completely false and that they haven't done any kind of research beforehand. While all of these prep steps are really basic interview things, we've seen people mess this up time and time again. And these are really silly reasons not to get a job, because these are things that are all within your control. Interview questions are not reinvented every time somebody goes in for one. There are only about 10 to 20 different questions. They're just phrased completely differently, but they're asking the same things. So if you formulate examples in your head, that'll help you succeed in those panel interviews. Now I want to go into more of what to expect on the day of and what you're doing. So when it comes to the panel interview, this will usually be a panel interview with a couple line staff members and then a couple members of leadership, possibly a hiring manager. During that panel interview, they're going to ask you somewhere between 5 and 20 questions. And they're going to be relatively standard questions, just probably phrased in the EMS mindset. Now, I will say that all of this still applies to police and fire, but there will be some other variations within those. Now, those questions might seem like they're very specific to what you're doing, but really if you go on and you start doing your research online about interview questions, there are only a handful of questions that are ever actually asked. They're just phrased differently. So if you have answers to the standard questions and you understand the root of what it's asking, you can formulate experiences in your head and relay those in the interview. When we ask you for an example, we want an example. We do not want you to be pulling out a hypothetical or explaining your in-depth thought process before giving us that example. That's the most important part of those questions. A big one we see people mess up on is conflict resolution. So we work very closely in teams. Not everybody gets along wherever you are, so we have to know that you know how to mitigate conflict. Now, I'm not going to say that there's one answer for this, but what we really want you to say in these questions is, if I have an issue with somebody, I'm going to address it with them first. If they are unresponsive to that, I will try addressing it again. If that still doesn't work, I'm going to go to my direct manager and report the situation. If we give you a safety question that you see your partner is about to make a mistake and it might harm the patient, we want you to say that you will intervene right away. Now, both of those, they will probably ask you for examples of times you did that in the past, so have one of those ready. When it comes to the knowledge test, this can come in a couple different forms. The form that we use is an in-person scenario, and we have been doing it tabletop. We're going to be transitioning more into a national registry style with an actor portraying a patient. From this, if you have passed national registry, which I know you have if you're applying for one of these jobs, then you can pass one of these scenarios. Know your algorithms, know your trauma assessment, your medical assessment, and go through those step by step, because most employers will have a very similar sheet in front of them, making sure you're hitting all the basics, getting your history taken. But then also we want you to take it one step forward. We want you to also be establishing some differential diagnoses and really showing off your knowledge of medical care. With these, you should not be super pressured into these. These are relatively easy, relatively straightforward, and we are not trying to trick you. Some places might throw you a curveball here and there, but generally speaking, they're a standard scenario, and there's a very prescribed set of things we want you to do and demonstrate. The other kind that you might see is a written test. Written tests are a little bit less common, and sometimes they will be put in with a scenario. With a written test, just know they're going to be national registry questions unless you're applying for a flight position or a critical care position. Otherwise, we are testing you to the standard that you were trained to. We are not testing you to a standard that's above most of the time. There are some agencies that might throw these super hard questions there. If you're seeing things that are completely outlandish, they're trying to establish a curve. They're trying to figure out where you sit on that, and they're expecting a lot of people to do bad, and they're looking for the outliers that are doing good. So just be aware that those exist. During these scenarios, it's super important to be very verbal. Do not stop talking. Talk through your entire thought process. Ask any question that you want during the scenario, and make sure that you're engaging the evaluators. A lot of times they'll sit back and they'll just start thinking. That's not helpful. Sit back, start thinking, but think out loud. Let us know what your thought process is, and then we can look at that and see that you actually have a good understanding, even if it takes you a little while to get to that conclusion we were looking for. Third and finally, the physical test. Now for EMS, this is slightly less common. Physical tests are really hard to validate. There's not really a standard EMS physical test out there, so it does leave some places up for some liability. We personally do not do it, but generally speaking, a physical test has to be things that are related to the job. So they're not gonna ask you to do 500 push-ups, they're not gonna ask you to do 1,000,000 pull-ups or anything like that. This isn't special forces. What we're going to ask you to do is job-related activities. So a lot of times that will be lifting a heavy dummy into an ambulance with a manual cot. It will be doing CPR for a period of time, walking up and down stairs, carrying equipment, and so on and so forth. So just be prepared for those very functional activities. Most of the time, this isn't something that's ruling a ton of people out. We just have to establish a baseline for your fitness level. I wouldn't be too concerned with the fitness requirements, and like I said, it's not a super common thing you'll see in EMS interviews. So just a quick summary of everything we talked about. Wear a suit to your interview, prepare beforehand and rehearse your questions, print your resume and make sure your resume is well formatted on one page. If they ask for a CV, you can print out a multi-page CV, but that is the only time a multi-page is acceptable. Come in ready to do a panel interview and have those questions ready to go, do a skills assessment, and then possibly a fitness evaluation. Make sure you have a change of clothes, walk in, look people in the eye, shake their hands, and you will do just fine. If you do not get the job you want on the first go around, that is okay. Just because you weren't established an offer right there doesn't mean you won't be given an offer later. So it's okay if you fail. Go to lots of interviews, interview for your dream job, that's completely fine because it's practice, and ultimately practice will make you better. Just because you're a bad interviewer right now doesn't mean you can't get better in the future. So I really hope to see you guys in hiring, and I really hope to see you guys wearing suits. So if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and I will see you next week where we'll be going over the RATS pack and my wilderness medicine gear.